Hi. I keep getting cut off. It's kind of crazy. I guess I don't pay attention to time when I'm talking. I get excited. So we were talking about varicose veins. And when the valves don't work, then blood is going to pool, and that can cause this disfigurement. And typically we see these in the legs, but you can see them in a lot of areas of the body, including in the anal region. This is when we have hemorrhoids when we have varicose veins in the anal region. It's called hemorrhoids, and a lot of people will have these, especially if they are bearing down to get rid of fecal matter. So when you're pooping, or when you're giving birth. Very common disorder associated with birth. This is what it looks like. So here's normal valves. Blood flows upwards, and then when the muscles relax, the blood flows back down, but the veins are closed, the valves are closed, so the veins, blood can't go back down through the veins. With the varicose veins, the valves don't close all the way. Another disorder associated with blood vessels, actually, this is really with all three parts, the blood vessels, and the heart, circulatory shock. This occurs when one of the three important parts of the cardiovascular system are no longer functioning. If the heart doesn't work, then you're not going to get enough nutrients to your body tissues because you're not getting the blood pumped out effectively. If blood vessels aren't functioning properly, again, then you're not going to get the blood back to the heart effectively or out to the blood tissues, and you're not going to get nutrients to pass out, the nutrients to the tissues like you're supposed to. And if your blood is not functioning, so you've lost blood, you don't have enough blood, your blood doesn't work properly, it's not carrying the nutrients like it's supposed to, then again you're going to end up in circulatory shock because you're not getting enough perfusion to your body tissues. One of the last things we'll talk about in this chapter is blood pressure and how we control blood pressure, because blood pressure is really important. And surprising, but our endocrine and our nervous system help control blood pressure, right? I mean, these are our two messenger systems that we just talked about. And so they lead right into the cardiovascular system. Blood pressure is associated with a pressure gradient. That's why it's called blood pressure. And the higher the gradient, or the more steep the gradient, the higher the blood pressure will go. And more blood flows. The decrease of the gradient, the slower blood is going to flow, and you're going to have a lower blood pressure. Make sense? So there are different factors that affect blood pressure. Resistance is one of those factors. Resistance is anything that is going to keep blood from flowing as fast. So things like the thickness of blood. Anything thicker, if it's really thick, it's not going to flow as effectively. Think of a molasses flowing out of a bottle versus water coming out of a bottle. Water comes out much faster because it's not as thick. So resistance, such as thickness of blood or the lumen, I'm going like this, like you can see that, right? The lumen of the blood vessel, smaller lumens are going to have more resistance than larger lumens, makes sense? Is going to affect how fast blood can flow. So here are some examples of resistance. I already talked minimally about vessel radius, so the size of the lumen of the blood vessel, viscosity, the thickness of blood, and then the length of the vessel. Think about when you, if you ever ran track or cross country, one of the times that your coach probably told you need to pick it up was around a turn, around a curve, because when you're going around a curve, you tend to slow down. It's just natural. Just like when driving, when you go around a curve, you slow down. You don't speed up. And so your coach always tells you, hey, speed up during this time so that you can make it to the finish line faster than others, because they're not going to speed up. They're going to slow down on those curves. So the length, if you have a long blood vessel, then you're going to have faster flow because it doesn't have to slow down as much to make those turns. Things that affect the viscosity of blood, the amount of blood cells inside of the blood, the amount of protein inside of the blood, these are going to affect the amount or the thickness of the blood. Less protein, less blood cells is going to lead to a thinner blood. And then if you have anything that increases the proteins of the blood, then that's going to cause bigger blood. And if you're wondering what that is, it's my stress ball. I love her, or him. It's my infectious disease ball. Vessel length is just associated with how fast blood pressure can, or with how fast blood can flow, because if you have a long vessel, blood can flow nice and quick because there's not very much resistance. If you have a short blood vessel, you have a lot of turns, curves, that's going to cause blood vessels to, or that's going to cause the blood to have to slow down so it can make that turn. And then the radius. This is probably the most important of the resistance factors, the size of the lumen. If you have a lumen that's very large, you're going to have a lot more blood that can flow through it. If that lumen constricts, then less blood can flow. And here's an example. If the radius is 3 millimeters, then we can have about 81 millimeters of blood moving through that lumen per second. But if we change the radius to 1 millimeter, we now have only 1 millimeter of blood moving through that lumen per second. So this is just a figure that shows the difference, or how to figure out blood flow. You have the pressure gradient, and that's going to be divided by the resistance. And here are the different resistance factors. The size of the lumen, here's the gradient, the thickness of the blood, and the length of the blood vessel. Okay? So how do we control blood pressure then? We know that there's all these different factors that influence blood pressure, but what actually controls blood pressure? I mentioned it a second ago, so I'm going to wait a second, and then I'm going to say, oh, the endocrine and nervous system are what control blood pressure. And it's actually written on here, so you didn't really have to think a lot for it because I have it written down. So fast nervous system is your primary fast-acting messenger system. Responses are very rapid, but they're very short-lived as well. So the nervous system does influence blood pressure to some extent, though, because it's going to control specifically the movement of your blood pressure from sympathetic to parasympathetic conditions. Sympathetic, your fight or flight, and then parasympathetic, your rest and relaxation system. And so in the medulla, we have these regions. This is a really yucky looking picture, I'm sorry. We have these regions called the cardioacceleratory and cardioinhibitory regions that are going to control not only the heart rate, but they also influence the blood vessel diameter. And so if you're in the sympathetic system, then you're going to cause increase in heart rate, and you're going to cause blood vessels, depending on which ones, to open up, become larger, and others to close up. you're in the sympathetic system, there are certain organs that need the blood so that you can fight or flee. In the parasympathetic system, then we use that vagus nerve to slow the heart rate down, and this is going to also allow for blood vessels to relax in those areas that were constricted before so that we can have normal body functions occurring again. So the vasomotor center, I mentioned both the cardiac and then I said blood vessels as well. In the vasomotor center, we have alpha receptors and beta receptors. Alpha receptors are going to cause blood vessels to contract in a sympathetic system. And this is going to cause those blood vessels to get really small so that blood flows to places like our brain, our respiratory system, our muscles, areas of our body that need blood to survive for that stressful situation. Things like our digestive system, urinary system, they're not important right now because we're in a stress response. We have to fix whatever's going on. And this can be, something as minimal as like exercising puts us in that stress mode. I'm not talking about being sick all the time. I'm talking about every day we enter a stress response and then we enter the relaxation response. And this is what's going on. Beta receptors are responding to the change in stimulation, and they're opening up, and they're going to allow more blood flow to the muscles, to the brain, to the respiratory system. This allows us to move blood around so that our fight or flight reaction can be very strong. We have other things that influence, so I talk about stress response because that's like a huge one, but what actually stimulates, because yeah, a stressor stimulates it, but a deer running in front of my car, I respond to it. What inside my body responds? So there are different receptors in the body that will respond and send signals to the sympathetic and parasympathetic regions. Baroreceptors, these are pressure receptors, are going to respond in response to either an increase or decrease in blood pressure. So baroreceptors will send signals telling us to either lower or increase our blood pressure. When I get home, I'm going to the gym and I'm going to start exercising. I'm going to have baroreceptors, so pressure receptors, that are going to respond to a change in the amount of blood that is flowing through my system that will cause the blood vessels either to relax or they will contract. So the regions that we have baroreceptors are in the carotid artery, and we have baroreceptors in the aorta as well. We have, and I just mentioned this, so if you have decreased blood pressure, you don't have as much pressure, so you're not going to have as much of a stretch on the blood vessel wall. That's going to cause you to increase the resistance to make the blood pressure go back up where it's supposed to be. And then if you have an increase in blood pressure, it's going to drop down. We also have, and here I told you where the baroreceptors are located in the aorta as well as in the carotid arteries. Chemoreceptors are going to respond to a change in the amount of carbon dioxide in our system, as well as oxygen, and also to the pH of our system. They are also located in the aorta as well as in our carotid arteries. And the main things they respond to are carbon dioxide and pH. So if your carbon dioxide levels are high, then your pH levels are low. They are inversely correlated. Carbon dioxide, pH. So if your carbon dioxide starts going down, pH is going to rise. They're completely inversely correlated. And then oxygen levels have an influence, but not near as much as other things. I'm going to stop here so that I don't get cut off. Bye.